The scorching sun beat down on Gwendolyn Drake's pale skin as she stared at the document before her, the black ink seeming to dance mockingly across the page. Marriage or prison, the judge had declared, offering her an impossible choice that was hardly a choice at all. "You can't be serious," Gwendolyn whispered, her voice barely audible over the creaking of the wooden floorboards in the Silver Creek courthouse. The year was 1873, and the Wyoming Territory was still wild and untamed, much like the emotions swirling within her chest. Judge Porter peered down at her over his spectacles, his weathered face showing no sympathy. "Miss Drake, the law is quite clear. You've been living on land that belongs to the Abbott Ranch for nearly 8 months without permission. That's trespassing, and Mr. Abbott here has pressed charges." Yates Abbott stood silently beside her, his tall frame casting a shadow that seemed to engulf her. She'd never spoken more than 10 words to the man, despite living on the outskirts of his vast property. He was known throughout Silver Creek as a hardworking, honest rancher who kept to himself. His sun-weathered face revealed little emotion, but his deep blue eyes held something Gwendolyn couldn't quite define. "There must be another way," she pleaded, clutching her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. "There is," Judge Porter replied, clearing his throat. "As Mr. Abbott has generously offered, you can marry him and legally reside on his property, or you can serve 6 months in territorial prison for willful trespassing. The choice is yours, Miss Drake." Gwendolyn's throat went dry. Prison would surely be a death sentence for a woman alone. But marriage to a stranger, to this quiet cowboy who'd now trapped her in an impossible situation. "I don't understand," she said, turning to face Yates Abbott directly. "Why would you offer marriage instead of simply demanding I leave your land?" Yates shifted his weight, his spurs jingling softly. "You've made improvements to that old hunting cabin, built yourself a garden, seems you need the place more than I do." His voice was deep but gentle, surprising her. "And I could use help around the ranch house, it's a practical arrangement." Practical? The word stung more than it should have. Judge Porter cleared his throat impatiently. "Your decision, Miss Drake." The courtroom felt suffocatingly small. Gwendolyn looked down at her worn boots, then back up at the tall cowboy beside her. His expression remained unreadable, but there was no cruelty there, just patience. "Waiting, I'll marry him," she whispered, the words falling from her lips like stones. "I'll marry the cowboy." The Abbott Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Wyoming grassland, the main house standing solid against the backdrop of distant mountains. As Yates guided his wagon up the long dirt road, Gwendolyn sat rigidly beside him, her simple white dress borrowed from the judge's wife for the hasty ceremony gathering dust with each turn of the wheels. "It's not much," Yates said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town, "but it's home." Gwendolyn said nothing, her eyes fixed on the approaching 2-story house. It was far grander than the tiny cabin she'd been living in, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and smoke curling from the stone chimney. "My father built it," Yates continued, seemingly untroubled by her silence. "Added onto it over the years. Got 15 men working the ranch now, but they've got their own quarters by the barn." As they pulled up to the house, an older woman appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's Mrs. Holloway," Yates explained. "Housekeeper, comes in 3 days a week to cook and clean. Best biscuits in the territory." The woman nodded politely as Yates helped Gwendolyn down from the wagon, her curious eyes taking in the young woman's appearance. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Gwendolyn," Yates said, then added after a moment's hesitation, "Mrs. Abbott." The name sent a shock through Gwendolyn's system. Mrs. Abbott, a name she'd gained through necessity rather than choice. "Welcome, madam," Mrs. Holloway said, her smile warm despite the unusual circumstances. "I've prepared the master bedroom for you both." Gwendolyn's cheeks flushed hot as the implications sank in. Of course they would be expected to share a room. This was a legal marriage, after all. "Actually," Yates interjected, "prepare the blue room for Mrs. Abbott, please. I'll continue using my father's old room." Relief washed over Gwendolyn, followed quickly by confusion. She glanced up at her new husband, trying to read his expression. "Separate rooms?" Mrs. Holloway asked, clearly surprised. "For now," Yates confirmed, picking up Gwendolyn's single bag. "My wife will need time to settle in." "My wife." The words hung in the air between them as they entered the house. Inside, the home was unexpectedly comfortable. Solid furniture, clean floors, and surprisingly tasteful touches throughout. Gwendolyn had imagined a bachelor's Spartan quarters, but this was a proper home. "I'll show you to your room," Yates said, leading her up the wooden staircase. The blue room, as it was called, was bright and airy, with a large window overlooking the eastern pastures. A four-poster bed dominated the space, covered in a handmade quilt. "This was my mother's sewing room," Yates explained, placing her bag on a chair. "Had it converted after she passed 5 years back. It's lovely," Gwendolyn managed, the first words she'd spoken since leaving the courthouse. Yates nodded, seemingly pleased by her response. "Dinner's at 6. Kitchen's downstairs if you need anything before then." He turned to leave but paused at the doorway. "I know this isn't what you wanted, Gwendolyn, but I aim to be a good husband to you in whatever way that means." Before she could respond, he was gone, his bootsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Gwendolyn alone with her thoughts and the reality of her new life. The first week passed in awkward politeness. Gwendolyn learned the rhythms of the ranch house, gradually meeting the ranch hands who tipped their hats respectfully to Mrs. Abbott. Yates rose before dawn each day and returned near sunset, sometimes joining her for silent dinners before retreating to his study or his bedroom. On the 8th day, Gwendolyn ventured to the barn where she found Yates mending a saddle. "I'd like to retrieve some of my belongings from the cabin," she said, standing straight-backed in the doorway. Yates looked up from his work, a strand of dark hair falling across his forehead. "Of course. I can take you tomorrow morning. I can go myself if you'll lend me a horse." A slight smile touched his lips. "Can you ride?" "Since I was 6, she replied, lifting her chin slightly. Yates nodded. "Take Penny, she's gentle but sure-footed." He hesitated. "But I'd feel better riding along with you. There's been talk of rustlers in the area." Gwendolyn wanted to object, to assert her independence, but the concern in his eyes seemed genuine. "Very well." The next morning, they set out across the rolling grasslands, the early summer sun warming their backs. Gwendolyn had donned her own clothes, a simple blue riding skirt and white blouse, rather than the dresses Mrs. Holloway had helped her alter from Yates's mother's old wardrobe. "How did you end up in my hunting cabin?" Yates asked as they rode side by side, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Gwendolyn hesitated, the painful memories surfacing. "My father died last year, influenza. The bank in Denver foreclosed on our home." She kept her eyes fixed ahead. "I had an aunt in Oregon who offered to take me in, but I only made it as far as Silver Creek when my money ran out. And you found the cabin. It was abandoned, falling apart, I thought," she sighed. "I thought if I fixed it up, made it livable, whoever owned it might let me stay in exchange for the improvements." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "It's why I didn't have the sheriff run you off when my foreman first reported smoke from the cabin chimney. Could tell someone was putting work into the place." "Then why the court case?" Gwendolyn asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Yates looked genuinely troubled. "That wasn't my intention. I only mentioned to Sheriff Tompkins that I was wondering about the woman staying in my cabin. Next thing I knew, Judge Porter had issued a trespassing charge." He met her gaze directly. "When I heard they were taking you to court, I rode in to stop it. Porter said the only way to dismiss the charges was if you had legal right to be there. So you offered marriage," Gwendolyn concluded. "It seemed the simplest solution at the time," he admitted. "Though I realize now it might not have felt that way to you." They rode in silence until the small cabin came into view, nestled against a copse of trees beside a bubbling creek. Seeing it from a distance, Gwendolyn felt a pang of loss. Though crude and simple, it had been hers. A place she'd created with her own hands. As they dismounted, Yates surveyed the improvements: the patched roof, the small vegetable garden, the stack of firewood neatly cut and arranged. "You did all this yourself?" he asked, genuine admiration in his voice. "I did," she replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "Father taught me to be resourceful." Inside, the cabin was small but meticulously organized. A bed with a straw mattress stood in one corner, a small table and chair in another, and a rudimentary fireplace dominated the wall opposite the door. Gwendolyn gathered her few belongings: clothing, a hairbrush, a framed photograph of her parents, and several books while Yates respectfully waited outside. When she emerged, he was kneeling beside her garden, examining the rows of young vegetables. "These shouldn't go to waste," he said, standing as she approached. "We could transplant them to the kitchen garden at the ranch." Gwendolyn felt a curious warmth at his consideration. "I'd like that." As they prepared to leave, Gwendolyn cast one last look at the cabin. "What will happen to it now?" Yates secured her bag to his saddle before answering. "It's still here if you ever need a place to think, to be alone." His eyes held hers. "This marriage doesn't have to be a prison, Gwendolyn." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the house, Gwendolyn finally spoke the question that had been troubling her. "Why did you really offer marriage, Yates? The truth." He slowed his horse, considering her question carefully. "I've watched you from a distance these past months, seen your determination. Your strength." A faint color touched his tan cheeks. "Admired it, truth be told. When Judge Porter presented the charges, marriage seemed the only way to protect you." He met her gaze directly. "But I meant what I said. This marriage can be whatever we choose to make it." That night, for the first time since arriving at the Abbott Ranch, Gwendolyn slept soundly, her dreams no longer haunted by uncertainty. As June gave way to July, Gwendolyn gradually found her place in the rhythm of ranch life. She took over management of the house from Mrs. Holloway, who seemed relieved to focus solely on cooking. She expanded the kitchen garden with her transplanted vegetables and added a small herb patch that soon flourished under her care. Yates remained respectful and distant, though Gwendolyn occasionally caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite define. They shared meals more regularly now, their conversations growing less stilted as they discovered common interests, books they'd both read, a shared appreciation for music, similar views on the changing territory around them. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Yates broke their comfortable silence. "The Independence Day celebration is happening in town next week," he said, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on his knee. "Would you like to attend? Together?" Gwendolyn looked at him in surprise. They had not yet appeared in public as husband and wife, aside from their hasty courthouse wedding. "As a proper married couple, you mean?" Yates nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "People will talk less if they see us together. Might make things easier for you in town." She considered his words. The few times she'd ventured into Silver Creek for supplies, she'd felt the weight of curious stares, heard the whispered rumors about her strange marriage to the Abbott rancher. "Yes," she decided, "I think that would be wise." The day of the celebration dawned bright and clear. Gwendolyn spent extra time on her appearance, donning a green dress that Mrs. Holloway had helped her alter from one of Mrs. Abbott's old gowns. She pinned her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. When she descended the stairs, Yates was waiting in the foyer, dressed in a clean black suit rather than his usual ranch clothes. He stared at her for a long moment before finding his voice. "You look beautiful, Gwendolyn." The simple sincerity in his words brought warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." The town square had been transformed for the celebration. Banners hung from buildings, tables groaned under the weight of food brought by local families, and a small band played lively tunes for dancing. As they arrived, Yates offered his arm, which Gwendolyn took after only a brief hesitation. Together, they entered the celebration and immediately became the center of attention. Sheriff Tompkins approached first, hat in hand. "Mrs. Abbott, good to see you settling in." His eyes darted between them. "Wasn't sure we'd see you both today." "Wouldn't miss it, Sheriff," Yates replied easily, his hand coming to rest lightly on the small of Gwendolyn's back. The gesture was possessive yet protective, sending an unexpected shiver up her spine. Throughout the afternoon, Gwendolyn met the prominent citizens of Silver Creek, the banker and his wife, the mercantile owner, the schoolteacher, all watching her with varying degrees of curiosity. Yates remained constantly at her side, his quiet strength a comfort against the scrutiny. "Mrs. Abbott, you must tell us how you and Yates met," Mrs. Porter, the judge's wife, insisted as they sat at a long table for the community meal. "It was all so sudden," Gwendolyn froze, unsure how to answer without revealing the forced nature of their union. "We met when Gwendolyn was passing through on her way to Oregon," Yates interjected smoothly. Sometimes you just know when something's right. Didn't see the point in waiting. His hand covered hers on the table, a simple gesture that felt strangely intimate. Gwendolyn glanced at him in surprise, but his expression revealed nothing as he continued the conversation with the judge. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around a cleared space for dancing. The band struck up a waltz, and couples began to take the floor. "Would you dance with me, wife?" Yates asked quietly, offering his hand. Gwendolyn hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I would, husband." On the dance floor, Yates proved to be surprisingly graceful for a man who spent his days on horseback. His hand was warm and sure at her waist, guiding her through the steps with easy confidence. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" Gwendolyn asked, genuinely curious. A smile touched his lips. "My mother insisted, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." Gwendolyn laughed, the sound surprising them both. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Yates said softly, his eyes growing distant with memory. "You would have liked her, she would have approved of you." The words touched something deep within Gwendolyn's chest. "Even knowing the circumstances of our marriage," Yates's gaze returned to her, his blue eyes intensely focused. "Especially then. She believed in making the best of whatever life presents you." "Is that what we're doing?" Gwendolyn asked, her voice barely audible above the music. "Making the best of it," his hand tightened slightly at her waist. "I think we could do more than that if you're willing." Before Gwendolyn could respond, the music ended, and the moment passed as they were drawn into conversation with other townspeople. Later that night, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, a comfortable silence settled between them. The ranch house was dark when they arrived, Mrs. Holloway having retired to her own small house behind the main building. Yates helped Gwendolyn down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. In the silver moonlight, his face was cast in shadows that softened his strong features. "Thank you for today," Gwendolyn said softly, "for making it easier than it could have been." Yates nodded, still standing close. "Thank you for coming with me, for playing the part so well. Was it all just a part?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. In answer, Yates slowly raised his hand to her face, his fingertips brushing her cheek with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Not for me," he whispered. "Not anymore." Their first kiss was tentative, questioning a beginning rather than a demand. When they parted, Gwendolyn saw in Yates's eyes the same confusion and hope that swirled within her own heart. "Good night, Gwendolyn," he said, stepping back respectfully. "Good night, Yates," she replied. Turning to enter the house with her thoughts in turmoil and her lips still tingling from his touch, August brought scorching heat to the Wyoming Territory, the sun beating down mercilessly on the parched land. The ranch hands worked from dawn until the worst of the midday heat, then resumed their labors in the evening hours. Yates often returned to the house drenched in sweat, exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. After their night at the Independence Day celebration, something had shifted between them. Meals were shared with easier conversation, accidental touches lingered longer, and Gwendolyn found herself watching for Yates's return each evening with growing anticipation. Yet they had not spoken of the kiss they'd shared, nor had Yates attempted to claim his rights as a husband. He remained in his own bedroom, though Gwendolyn sometimes caught him watching her with a hunger that made her heart race. One sweltering afternoon, as Gwendolyn was preserving vegetables from the garden, a commotion outside drew her attention. Through the kitchen window, she saw several ranch hands carrying a figure toward the house. With a jolt of fear, she recognized Yates's limp form. She rushed outside, wiping her hands on her apron. "What happened?" "Horse spooked at a rattler," explained Thomas, the ranch foreman. "Boss took a bad fall trying to control it, hit his head on a rock." "Bring him inside," Gwendolyn directed, her fear giving way to focused determination. "To his bedroom." The men carried Yates up the stairs, laying him carefully on his bed. A gash on his forehead bled freely, matting his dark hair. "Send someone for the doctor," Gwendolyn instructed, already gathering clean cloths and water. "And Mrs. Holloway, if you can find her." As the men departed to follow her orders, Gwendolyn gently began cleaning Yates's wound. His skin was hot to the touch, his breathing shallow but steady. "Yates," she called softly, her hand resting against his cheek. Can you hear me? His eyelids fluttered, then opened, his blue eyes unfocused. Gwen, he murmured, using the shortened version of her name for the first time. Relief flooded through her. I'm here, you've had a fall, the doctor's coming. He tried to sit up but grimaced in pain. Dizzy, he admitted, sinking back against the pillows. Stay still, she ordered gently, continuing to clean the blood from his face. You'll be all right. Dr. Marshall arrived an hour later, examining Yates thoroughly before pronouncing him concussed but not seriously injured. Keep him quiet for a few days, the doctor instructed Gwendolyn. Wake him every few hours tonight to be sure. If he becomes confused or cannot be roused, send for me immediately. After the doctor left, Gwendolyn prepared a light broth and helped Yates sit up enough to eat a few spoonfuls. His usual strength was diminished, his movements careful and measured. You don't have to nurse me, he protested weakly. I'm your wife, Gwendolyn replied simply. Of course I do. A faint smile touched his lips. A wife by law's demand, not choice. Perhaps at first, she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty, but things change, Yates. His eyes, though pained, searched hers intently. Do they? Before she could answer, Mrs. Holloway arrived, flustered and concerned. Gwendolyn handed over the immediate care of Yates while she went to prepare for the night ahead, arranging a chair beside his bed where she would maintain her vigil. Throughout the night, Gwendolyn woke Yates as the doctor had instructed, asking simple questions to ensure his mind remained clear. During one such awakening near dawn, he caught her hand as she adjusted his blankets. You should rest, he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. I'm fine, she assured him, though exhaustion pulled at her limbs. Lie down, he said, moving slightly to make space beside him on the large bed. Just for a while. Too tired to argue, Gwendolyn carefully settled beside him, maintaining a proper distance. But as sleep claimed her, she unconsciously shifted closer to his warmth. When she woke hours later, sunlight streaming through the windows, she found herself curled against Yates's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. For a long moment, she remained still, savoring the unfamiliar intimacy. I could get used to waking like this, Yates said softly, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. Gwendolyn looked up to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert. The gash on his forehead had begun to heal, the angry red fading to a duller hue. How are you feeling? She asked, reluctantly pulling away to sit up. Better, he said, though he winced slightly as he shifted position. Thanks to your care. Over the next few days, as Yates recovered, Gwendolyn found numerous excuses to be in his room, bringing meals, changing bandages, reading to him from the newspaper or one of his books. They talked more during those days than they had in all the previous months combined. Yates told her of growing up on the ranch, of losing his mother to pneumonia and his father to a heart attack within 2 years of each other. He spoke of his dreams for the ranch, the improvements he hoped to make, the legacy he wanted to build. In turn, Gwendolyn shared stories of her childhood in Denver, her father's work as a lawyer, and her mother's passion for botany that had inspired Gwendolyn's own love of growing things. She confessed her fear and uncertainty after her father's death, and the desperation that had driven her to claim the abandoned cabin. On the 4th day of his convalescence, as evening shadows lengthened across the bedroom floor, Yates caught her hand as she adjusted his pillows. I've been thinking, he said, his expression serious, about our arrangement. Gwendolyn's heart stuttered. Oh, these past months, living as husband and wife in name only, he hesitated. It's not what I want anymore. She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, her pulse quickening. What do you want, Yates? His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. A real marriage, not just because the law demanded it, but because, he took a breath. Because I find myself falling in love with you, Gwendolyn Abbott. The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Gwendolyn stared at their joined hands, emotions swirling through her. You don't have to answer now, Yates added quickly. I know this began as necessity, not choice. If you don't feel I do, she interrupted, finally meeting his gaze. Feel something I wasn't expecting. Her voice softened, something I've been afraid to acknowledge. Yates's free hand came up to cup her cheek. Don't be afraid, not with me. This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only the growing certainty that what had begun as a legal obligation had blossomed into something neither of them had anticipated. The transformation of the Abbott ranch house was gradual but unmistakable as summer turned to autumn. Curtains appeared at windows that had been bare for years. Fresh flowers graced the dining table each evening. The sounds of Gwendolyn's laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. And Yates Abbott, once known throughout Silver Creek as a solitary, serious man, now wore his happiness openly for all to see. Ranch hands commented on his easy smile, the way he whistled while working, the spring in his step as he returned home each evening. 3 months after their courthouse wedding, Yates and Gwendolyn were truly married in the small church in Silver Creek, exchanging vows they now meant with all their hearts before friends and neighbors who had watched their unusual union transform into a love match. That night, as they lay tangled together in what was now their shared bedroom, Gwendolyn traced the scar on Yates's forehead, the only remaining evidence of the accident that had brought them truly together. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Offering marriage that day in the courthouse." Yates caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Not for a single moment, though I regret the circumstances that forced your hand." "I don't," Gwendolyn admitted. "Not anymore. If I hadn't been so desperate, if I hadn't trespassed on your land," she smiled, "I might never have found you." "I like to think we would have found each other anyway," Yates replied, pulling her closer. "Some things are just meant to be." As autumn progressed, the ranch prepared for the coming winter. Hay was stored, cattle moved to protected pastures, and the house made ready for the harsh Wyoming cold. Gwendolyn worked alongside the ranch hands when needed, earning their respect with her willingness to learn and her unwavering support of Yates. One crisp October morning, as frost glittered on the grasslands surrounding the ranch house, Gwendolyn sat at the kitchen table, a letter from her aunt in Oregon spread before her. The woman had finally tracked her down, expressing concern over her prolonged silence. Yates entered, stomping snow from his boots. "Cold one today," he remarked, crossing to kiss her cheek before pouring himself coffee. "What's that?" "A letter from my Aunt Margaret," Gwendolyn explained. "She was expecting me in Oregon last year. Seems she's been trying to locate me for months." Yates sat across from her, his expression growing serious. "Will you go to her now?" Gwendolyn looked up in surprise. "Go to her? Why would I? You were headed there before." He hesitated. Before circumstances intervened, before our arrangement, understanding dawned on Gwendolyn's face. "You think I would leave? I would understand," Yates said carefully, though his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "If you wanted to, if you felt your obligation was fulfilled." Gwendolyn stood, moving around the table to sit in his lap, her arms encircling his neck. "Yates Abbott, you are a fool if you think I would leave you now." Relief flooded his features. "I just want you to know you have a choice, that you're free to go if you wish." "I made my choice," she said firmly. "Perhaps not that day in the courthouse, but every day since." She pressed her forehead to his. "I choose you, Cowboy, not because the law demands it, but because my heart does." Yates's arms tightened around her waist. "I was hoping you'd say that." That evening, as they sat before the crackling fire in the study, Yates presented Gwendolyn with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it curiously. "Open it," he urged. Inside lay a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond nestled on a bed of velvet. "Yates," she breathed, lifting the ring carefully. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I should have given it to you months ago, but it didn't seem right when our marriage was." He shrugged. "When it wasn't real yet." Gwendolyn extended her left hand, where a simple gold band already rested the hastily purchased ring from their courthouse wedding. "I love the one you gave me. This one belongs with it," Yates said, taking the diamond ring and sliding it onto her finger beside the plain band. "There. Now it's official." Gwendolyn admired the way the firelight caught the facets of the diamond. "It's beautiful." "There's something else," Yates said, a note of nervousness entering his voice. "I've been thinking about the cabin, the hunting cabin." Gwendolyn asked, surprised by the change of subject. Yates nodded. "I thought we might fix it up properly, add a room or two," he met her gaze, "for when we want to get away from the main house or for guests, or," she prompted when he hesitated. "Or for our children someday," he finished quietly, "if you want them." Gwendolyn's heart swelled at the tenderness in his eyes. "I do want them very much." "Good," Yates said, relief evident in his smile, "because I've already ordered lumber to start the additions come spring." As winter settled fully over the Wyoming Territory, the Abbott Ranch house stood warm and bright against the darkening landscape. Inside, Yates and Gwendolyn created their own sanctuary, building a life neither could have imagined when they stood before the judge those many months ago. Their marriage, born of necessity and law, had transformed into something neither had expected, a love that grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in respect, kindled by shared dreams, and nurtured by the choice they made each morning to build their life together. Spring arrived with a rush of green across the ranch lands, melting snow giving way to new growth that promised prosperity for the coming year. The cattle thrived, the ranch hands worked with renewed vigor, and Yates's plans for expanding their operations showed every sign of success. But the greatest joy came one sunny April morning when Gwendolyn confirmed what she had suspected for weeks: she was expecting their first child. She waited until evening to share the news, when Yates returned from a long day supervising the spring cattle drive. As they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a tradition they'd maintained through the seasons, she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We'll need that extra room at the cabin sooner than you thought," she said softly. Yates's expression transformed as understanding dawned, joy and wonder replacing the weariness of the day. "Gwen, are you certain?" she nodded, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes. "Dr. Marshall confirmed it today. Come November, there will be 3 Abbotts in this house." Yates gathered her into his arms, his laughter mingling with tears of his own. "I never thought." His voice broke with emotion. "I never dreamed I could be this happy." Throughout the summer, as Gwendolyn's body changed with the growing life within, Yates's protective nature intensified. He insisted on hiring additional help for the house, fretting whenever Gwendolyn attempted any task more strenuous than pouring tea. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him one July afternoon as he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of fresh laundry. "Humor me," he replied, taking the basket from her hands. "I've waited too long for this family to take any chances." The renovations on the cabin proceeded rapidly, with Yates personally overseeing the work when ranch duties allowed. What had once been a simple one-room structure was transformed into a comfortable 3-room cottage, with a proper bedroom, a living area with a stone fireplace, and a small nursery painted in cheerful yellow. "It's perfect," Gwendolyn declared when Yates brought her to see the completed project in late August. "Our own little retreat. I thought we might spend some time here after the baby comes," Yates suggested, his arm around her shoulders as they stood in the doorway. "Just the 3 of us, getting to know each other." Gwendolyn leaned into his embrace, her expanded belly pressing against his side. "I'd like that." As autumn painted the landscape in gold and crimson, Gwendolyn's time drew near. The ranch house was prepared for the coming arrival, with a cradle placed in their bedroom and tiny garments arranged in the nursery next door. On a blustery November night, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Gwendolyn went into labor. Yates rode through the darkness to fetch Dr. Marshall, while Mrs. Holloway, who had delivered countless babies in her time, stayed with Gwendolyn. The hours of labor were long and difficult, testing Gwendolyn's strength and Yates's composure as he paced the hallway outside their bedroom, flinching at each cry of pain from his beloved wife. Finally, as dawn broke over the eastern hills, a different cry filled the house, the lusty wail of a newborn announcing its arrival into the world. Dr. Marshall emerged from the bedroom, his tired face breaking into a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Abbott, you have a healthy daughter." Yates's legs nearly buckled with relief. "And Gwendolyn," exhausted but well, "you can go in now." Inside the bedroom, Gwendolyn reclined against pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Yates entered, her smile warm despite her exhaustion. "Come meet your daughter," she invited softly. Yates approached the bed with reverent steps, perching carefully on the edge to peer at the tiny face nestled against Gwendolyn's breast. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, they were the same deep blue as her father's. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking the infant's petal soft cheek. "I thought we might call her Margaret," Gwendolyn suggested, "after my mother." "Margaret Abbott," Yates tested the name. "It's beautiful, like her." His gaze shifted from the baby to his wife, love and wonder evident in his expression. Like you, Gwendolyn reached for his hand. I never imagined that day in the courthouse that life could bring me such happiness. That being forced to marry you would lead to this. Yates leaned forward to press his lips gently to hers. Sometimes the things we resist most turn out to be exactly what we need. As little Margaret grew from infant to toddler, the Abbott Ranch flourished under the combined efforts of Yates and Gwendolyn. They expanded their operations, added new buildings, and became known throughout the territory for their fair business practices and generous community support. 2 years after Margaret's birth, Gwendolyn gave birth to a son they named James, after Yates's father. The family split their time between the main ranch house and the cabin by the creek, which became their special retreat from the bustle of ranch operations. On a warm summer evening 5 years after their courthouse wedding, Yates and Gwendolyn sat on the porch of the cabin, watching 4-year-old Margaret and 2-year-old James chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Judge Porter passed through town yesterday, Yates commented, his hand entwined with Gwendolyn's on the bench between them. Asked after you, Gwendolyn smiled. Did you thank him for sentencing me to marriage? Yates chuckled. I probably should have. His expression grew more serious. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't trespassed on my land? Sometimes, Gwendolyn admitted. I might have made it to Oregon, met someone else, had a completely different life. She squeezed his hand. But I can't imagine it would have been as happy as this one. Yates brought her hand to his lips. I was so sure I'd spend my life alone, never thought I needed more than the ranch than my own company. His gaze drifted to their children, who had abandoned their firefly chase to examine something in the grass. Now I can't imagine life without all of you. The law may have demanded our marriage, Gwendolyn said softly, but love made it real. As darkness settled fully over the Wyoming landscape, Yates and Gwendolyn gathered their sleepy children and carried them inside the cabin. Later, with the little ones tucked safely in their beds in the nursery, husband and wife lay in each other's arms in the room that had once been Gwendolyn's solitary shelter. Happy, Yates murmured against her hair. Completely, Gwendolyn answered, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. You, Yates's arms tightened around her, more than I ever dreamed possible. Outside, the creek burbled its eternal song. The same waters that had witnessed Gwendolyn's desperate claim on the abandoned cabin now flowing past a home filled with love and laughter. The stars shone down on the Abbott Ranch, where a marriage of necessity had transformed into the deepest of bonds, proving that sometimes the greatest loves are born not from choice, but from circumstance and the courage to let one's heart follow where the law first led.